Welcome back to OpenLine. Our topic tonight is legal options and advice for victims of domestic violence. And here to help us navigate it all is Ameilia Luna. She's the Murfreesboro Managing Attorney for Family Law and Practice Lead at Legal Aid Society based out of Murfreesboro. You know, right before the break, we were talking about how, external conditions can have a lot of impact on domestic violence. Of course, we find ourselves in interesting times here, too, even, I don't want to say post-pandemic because who knows what that may look like, but we're getting to a situation now where inflation is obviously impacting a lot of bank accounts. How can that sometimes have a spillover effect when it comes to domestic violence?
Yeah, income has, and the access to income has a lot to do with whether or not someone's able to get out of a situation. Like I talked about earlier, power and control is one of the key things that perpetrators do, and so oftentimes the victim would not have a job and may be very dependent on the abuser, and if there's children, then they're all dependent on the support of the abuser, and so that can be difficult. But there are shelters available, the domestic violence programs in your service area. You can reach out to them, and it's a temporary, that you can, if there's room, they would be able to house you. Again, as we talked about through the order of protection, you can ask for support. You may be able to stay in the home and stay safe in the home during that time. Also, if there's been a separation and you don't have access to that income anymore, you may be eligible for food stamps, Families First, and so you can apply at the Department of Human Services and let them know that you no longer have that income, and you may be able to get those things. So those are just some areas. There is public housing that you can apply for to potentially get in, although those lists are often very long. But again, if the abuser has been the supporter, they could be made to pay support while you're separated.
Absolutely. You mentioned kids, and obviously that can have such an impact on a decision to leave. So maybe we start there of, what are some factors that parents that may be in toxic situations need to be considering when kids are involved? Yeah,
and that's another reason why people sometimes don't leave, because they maybe want to protect the children, and they know that if they separate, there's a chance that the abuser can get some custody, some be able to parent the child some, and they're worried about that with the child by themselves, whether the child might also be abused. And also, but there's another thing that parents need to consider is when children witness abuse, it has an adverse effect on children. People may have heard of adverse childhood experiences, ACE, and how that affects children. It has, seeing your parents and having one parent abuse the other and having violence in the home is very traumatic. And these these adverse childhood experiences can cause lasting trauma to the children. It's been shown that when this occurs, later on, those children grow up to have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, health problems. These witnessing these violent acts really affects them. So parents need to be thinking about that and the negative effects that it has on the kids. And it can also, there are times the Department of Children's Services could get involved if there's violence in the home and remove the children from both parents. If the parent is not removing themselves from the situation or protecting the children. So they could run the risk of losing their children, having them taken away and put in foster care, or maybe another family member taking care of them and being removed by the Department of Children's Services. So, and that's happened before. We've helped people to get a divorce, get separated, get independent, so they could get their children back because they had been living in a violent situation and it was reported, and the Department of Children's Services removed them. So trauma to the children. You may even lose your children if you don't get out of that abusive situation.
Sure. I want to bring Rob into the conversation, who's joining us over the phone. Rob, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
That's right. You were right both ways. That's right.
I've got a daughter, and it's been several years ago. She hooked up with a guy, and he was just one of those that could manipulate the situation I had a 2-year-old granddaughter. They lived together, and he was a bad dude. As Biden would say, he wasn't a good guy. To the parents out there, don't give up on your kids. Stay after them. I watched them. I stayed after them, her, and I didn't give up. Long story short, she kind of figured it out. Or she didn't kind of, she did. That, you know, eventually Dad knows best, and she finally got away from this fella. You know, he was a meth head, and thank God that, you know, to the parent, I guess my statement is to the parents that's got a kid with somebody that's abusive and overbearing, don't give up, stay after them, watch them, and keep control over your daughter if you can, or son. And anyways, I love everybody. Y'all have a good night.
Rob, thanks so much for the call. And I think he brings up a great point that you had already mentioned, that having somebody in your corner, you know, if you're the person ready to leave, but then also maybe having people in your life that can nudge you in that direction.
I'm glad that Rob called, and I'm glad that he brought that up. You know, it sounds from his situation that it was, you know, very, you know, on again and off again. And thankfully he was very supportive and continued to be supportive, because as I said earlier, it takes on average 8 times. So for somebody it might take 4, for somebody it might take 28. But if you have support like Rob, and as he was for his daughter and his granddaughter, then it becomes easier for you to be able to get out of that situation. So yeah, don't get, you know, it's hard because, you know, if you've not been in that situation, you might not understand, you know, and people, but if you have Rob's to be helpful and supportive, then it makes it easier to make that break.
And just to kind of continue with that that conversation, and Rob indicated that it took some time, and that can be, I feel like there probably has to be a delicate balance, right, between persistence, but also being supportive if that person is not there yet. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and it is, you know, you also don't want to be so negative that it prevents them from coming to you when there's a problem. So it's finding that delicate balance, and being supportive, but also not being so negative that they won't come for you to help. You know, keep pointing out resources to them. Counseling, you know, if they're agreeable to get counseling, even not suggesting that they, you know, just victim as a person to get counseling. And the domestic violence, a lot of the programs offer that, because sometimes, I mean, oftentimes and when I meet with my clients, we're at the divorce process, you know, but when we first start, you know, they're at one place, and when we're done, they're even so much far along, but they often tell me, like, I never realized how bad it was. I never realized, you know, how it went, you know, from one thing to the next. But having support like Rob, encouraging them to seek counseling, the victims, or support groups, so that they can get the courage. And then maybe even have access to resources when they're going to the counseling groups at the domestic violence program. Then they may find out about resources, and then they may realize, oh, I really can get out of this abusive relationship. It builds their confidence up, you know, and then just opens the doors to getting out of that.
Amy, you mentioned counseling resources for people that are involved. I would imagine there have to be resources for kids that are being witnesses to this as well. What are some of those resources?
Yeah, you know, the domestic violence programs, I know the one in Murfreesboro, I think they have a kids you know, group, but you know, your insurance companies, if you have insurance, may be able to provide some counseling for the kids. If you've got TennCare, there may be some counseling that you can get provided. But yes, there is counseling, and I always encourage my clients for them to get counseling, and their kids. Of course, sometimes there's the financial, and they may not be able to, but domestic violence programs may have some free services that they can access. So it's important, and I think that those of my clients who've done that have told me, I'm glad that I did this. This has been helpful. So.
Absolutely. We got a fantastic call from Rob. If you have something to contribute to the conversation or a question that you want to ask Amy, feel free to call. Our number is here on the screen, and we'll be back after this.